Good to see each and every one of you here at the annual Chicagoland Memorabilia Collectibles Show. Steve Bechtel and Jimmy McCarthy here on my right, putting on this great show again this year. Got a couple of gentlemen here that have been around the racing world, and I'll start on my right side, far right there. Four-time champ. He's got his keep his throat moist and that. Four-time track champion at Raceway Park. A big welcome for Pat Eklund. Pat Eklund with us today. Pat Eklund. I would start and say something silly like, I was just a little kid, you know, and I saw you racing there at Raceway Park, but that's not true.
Tommy.
Four-time track champion. How did you get started at Raceway Park back in the day?
That might be a pretty interesting story in the respect that...
this is a family show now, remember.
I had a friend of mine who lived right across the street from Raceway. He wanted to know if I wanted to go in halves on a car to bring it down the Raceway to go racing.
Ray Davis, maybe?
Ray Davis. And little did I know, Ray had found a car for $15.
A whole car for $15?
Whole car,
okay.
with the motor and everything, $15.
Wow.
So I couldn't pass it up. I said yes and took off from there. Yeah.
I believe then you kind of hooked up with a fellow by the name of Tommy Weckler, Turtle Weckler.
Yep, Tommy Turtle.
Yeah, Tommy Turtle, and for years you drove his car, and the Cam Bird, it was kind of, half Firebird and half Camaro, if I remember?
That's what it was, a Firebird rear clip and Camaro front end.
But then what year was it that Joe D'Ambrose put together that wedge car, and he won all those feature races and set fast time out there at Raceway Track?
84, yep.
1984.
Yep, and Joe's here today.
Yeah, I seen him. What do you think, Pat, over the years? I mean, 4 championships. Drove for Joe D'Ambrose, Ray Robleski's car.
Yep.
I mean, those were all top-shelf cars, and I would imagine that you would credit those guys.
Oh, Lord, yeah. I was always in the right spot at the right time as far as people in racing. I always was in the right place. I have no idea why, but just a lucky fella.
Looking back at your career, what would you say were highlights of that? Championships, those 4 titles there at Raceway, or maybe a race or two that you won at?
Definitely the wedge car. Was absolutely wonderful to drive. Easiest thing I ever drove. And the opening day, 1984 opening day, and I won that race that day. And that's the first trophy I ever won in a late model. So that's kind of a double-edged sword.
Well, what about all those trophies you have at your garage? Did you buy those, or, you know?
Those were all after opening day in 1984.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
A lot of gold there that you collected over the years.
That's for sure. It's hard to find a place to put them all.
And then, you know, finishing up your late model career, driving career, you started racing the vintage cars and did quite well in that. And memory of that, or kind of a day that you remember racing the vintage cars?
Probably when we went to Slinger, someplace I had never run before in my career. So when we went with that car, it was quite a great feeling for me.
Yeah, Slinger Speedway, a little different than Raceway Park.
Yeah. About the same circle-wise.
Circle-wise, but a little quicker.
A little bit different corner-wise.
Pat Eklund, it's always great to see you and talk to you. And, Kyle Harvey, go right ahead. I'm sorry.
I'd like to interject something here while we're talking to Pat. And it's not a commercial for the Illinois Stock Car Hall of Fame, but Ray Robleski needs to be in the Illinois Stock Car Hall of Fame.
Aye.
He's probably got more championships than Billy Koenig. If not, they're pretty close.
And he's the type of a guy that if you don't know him, he just kind of blends in at the pit area. You wouldn't know he's a many-time championship car owner.
Am I on? Yes.
Speak
I'll
up there,
interject,
Wayne.
too.
Speak up.
I will. All right. So speaking of Ray, that Zero car probably won more feature races than any other car ever at that racetrack. And that's owned by Ray Robleski. And that includes Billy Koenig's car through all those years, probably through about 100 of Kaler's features. So I'm going on record as the Zero car is the winningest car ever at Raceway. With Pat?
It may have been.
Mike White?
I agree, yeah.
Mike White?
Chuck Black.
Oh, yes, Chuck Black. Is he here today?
I didn't see him.
No. Well, why? Well, why isn't he
Was
here?
that an old Frank Galinsky car?
Yes, that was an old Frank Lewinsky car. It was a Dillon chassis that actually was originally purchased at the SRC shop, so that was cool.
SRC, yes, in Burnham, Illinois. Beautiful
Yes,
Burnham,
Illinois,
yes.
SRC.
Well, Roger, you finally showed up. I mean, I know it was hard to get here through the crowd and fans and et cetera, et cetera. Roger Smith, everybody, long-time official starter at Raceway Park.
Thank you.
You must have been there when you were just a tot, a little boy,
Yes.
as your dad worked there for many, many years.
Yes. I was just talking to somebody. The farthest back I can go is 1951, the year my dad flipped, and my mother and me were in the stands, and whoever it was, Girardi back then, whatever, come up and said to my mom, your husband is in the ambulance, we need to go. Not my husband doesn't race. They go, well, the guy's name is, he calls himself Smokey Smith, and he said that you are the family, so that's the first time I ever remember Raceway. I was probably, 6, 7, 8 years old.
Raceway Park, all those years of being in the stands as a young kid,
Yep.
and then all of a sudden you're in the infield working with your brothers,
Yes.
and your dad's flagging, and all of a sudden you take over the starting duties there, the starter duties, and tell us a few stories there about your flagging days at Raceway Park, and don't tell us about when you got run over there by a enduro car.
I started Raceway in the early 60s. I went in the service 2 years, and I came right back and was there until 2020.
2020.
Yeah, 2020. But I started out working the infield. Then I got the assistant starter. I worked that for, it seemed like ages. And my dad ended up having a mini stroke. And when I went to the track that night, I went up to the office, and Peter's wife, Blanche, I told her, I said, my dad won't be here tonight. He had a stroke, and she said, what do we do? And I said, I have no idea. And she said, do you have a set of flags? I said, no, but I could get my dad. She goes, you've been here long enough, it's yours. And ever since then, that's where I was at until maybe the last 2 years. Pete Yuko and Bob Talaski took over that, and Bob finished out the rest of the year. And I just went in the middle and kind of watched things.
My earliest recollection of Roger is giving me the move over sign, the leaders are coming.
I remember Roger Smith, his brothers, in the infield, and a young photographer shows up there one night, and I think Ham Labaza was the director of competition.
Right.
And he told this young photographer, he says, those three guys in the infield, if they tell you to jump, you just say, well, how high? And they kept a young kid from getting run over there at Raceway Park.
I can remember telling Stan, do not turn your back to him. Never, never. The last year of Raceway, I'm in the infield, and the dwarf cars were there. And I heard him hit the wall on the back stretch. I turned around, and no time to move. I jumped as high as I could.
You didn't follow your own advice.
Right. Jumped as high as I could. He caught my legs, flipped me. I was fine, though. Nothing, no injury, nothing. But it was funny. Like Kyle, I said after it was over, who got a picture? Nobody to this day got a picture. And like Kyle, One day the track had flooded. We're trying to clean up turn, 3 and 4? Here he comes out of the pits in a big truck inner tube with a stick or a paddle. He's in the water, paddling. And to this day, he keeps saying, nobody ever got a picture.
Luckily for you, nobody got a picture. Roger Smith, it's always a pleasure here to see you. And everybody, Roger Smith.
Thank you.
Longtime Raceway Park starter.
You told me it's
We'll go now to the far left, they tell me. The far left. It is left, right, this way? Yeah.
Let's see. Left.
Wayne
yes.
Coleman.
Hey, how we doing, Stan?
Good, Wayne.
Thank you.
Longtime kid in the grandstands and
Forever.
track. Yeah, go ahead.
About that last night, that we used to run up and then Kim Kemperman's here too.
Kim Kemperman. Yeah, all you
Wow.
kids caused just havoc there behind the grandstands.
Yeah, well, let me tell you this. There was a time.
Again, it's a family show.
Oh, yes. No, no. There was a time, and I don't know if he would be here today, but, well, let's see. Wayne Adams Jr., he's not here. Roger Kaler is not here. I am here, and I don't know about Bobby Cornwall. But Raceway used to have their own little go-kart track right where the hobby stock pits are for all you people that came later. Okay, that used to be the Raceway Park go-kart track. And it got to the point where between Wayne and Roger, Bobby and I, that our dads were on the track, or in Wayne's case, announcing. Oh my God, some of those go-kart races were legendary. Lots
Slam
of action.
bam.
Oh
Thank
yeah,
you,
we would
ma'am.
get
Look
thrown
out.
off. We would get thrown off and told not to come back, and then the next week the four of us would be together and we'd do it again. So we learned our early racing experiences there.
Wayne, of course, your dad was Stosh Coleman,
Yes,
legend at Raceway Park.
Yes, thank you.
as a kid growing up, I mean, not old enough to get in the pits. I mean, tell us a little bit about being Stosh Coleman's son.
Okay, well, this is the greatest thing about being Stosh Coleman's son. If I was to tell anybody, the best way I can put it, if anybody's familiar with Jared Payton, Walter Payton's son, well, he's a big TV star or whatever now, and he does a lot of interviews. But let me tell you, my life was like growing up with the 1985 Chicago Bears, only it was the 1950s Chicagoland Raceways Park. I mean, on a Sunday morning, I would get up and go out to the kitchen and look in there, and there's Johnny Slowiak, Bob Slepsky, Ted Janisic, Legs Whitcomb, my dad. These were guys that, like, we would, like, go, oh, my God, this is, like, awesome. And they're all like my dad's friends, so I'm like the kid, hey, you know, hi, guys. You know, they're like my buddies. Hey, come over here, kid, let me spank your ass. You know, and it was crazy. So growing up like that was kind of different. Oh, yeah. So now Kyle just brought this up. So if Lee Hirschfield is here, he can back this up too. 1967, I am waxing the top of my dad's 64 Chevelle, which is sponsored by Rosario's. Okay, we got to put them in there. And there's wax all over the roof, and all of a sudden this guy in a white shirt and tie walks in. It's Bob Pronger. And it's like, wow, Bob Pronger's in the garage. You know, I'm just working on the car. So he starts talking to my dad, and the next thing I know is the wax is on the roof of the car. He's sticking $100 bills on the roof of the car trying to buy the race car. And I'm going, oh, my God, I quit waxing the car. There we go. He had a lot of them up there. My dad's over there counting them, and my dad says, nope, not enough. And Bob goes, well, here. He puts another $500 up there on the roof. $3,000. My dad goes, it's
Bingo.
a deal. Bingo. It's a deal. This is 1966. So Bob says,
why did Bob buy the car? That's the best part of the
this
story.
is the best part of the story. So
At least
as
I think
Bob
so.
got, and this is I'm telling you, thank you, Lord, I'm not lying about this, but all you Bud Kaler fans, you can close your ears right now. Bob bought that car for one reason, to stop Bud from getting his 300th feature win at that time. All right, he could not bear the fact of that happening. My dad started the season out, was having a good year. Bob bought the car. They had enough points probably to almost win the championship that year between the two of them, I believe. I could be wrong on that. But get down to the end of the season, it's Monza night, and they get going in the feature race. And, of course, who's the best two guys at Raceway? Bud and Bob. And they both got great cars, and Bob is all over Bud. He sort of moves him. Bud comes back, moves him. Bob gets mad, spins him out. So they go back and restart. This is in the Monzas now. They start Bob in the back because, as Roger knows, you put the guy that spins the guy out to the back. Okay. So they get the green flag, and Bob Pronger stops at the start-finish line, and he's waiting there. And the cars go around the track, and as Bud comes by leading the race, Pronger pulls out, and it's a gigantic wreck down in turn one.
No.
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Oh, my God. Unbelievable. It's happened before, but it happened then.
And
Bob
it,
gets
and it
out.
would happen again. Yeah.
Yes, and it would happen again if they were still here. Trust me. Bob gets out of the car, puts his helmet, he carries it off the track. My dad's coming out there to see how the car is, and Bob says, "It's your car, Stas. You can have it back. You can do whatever you want to do with the car. I'm done." Well, we took the car and put the car back on the truck that night and took it home. The next week, I believe, was the 300 lapper, which my dad drove and just kicked butt in that race. Fast time, won the race hands down, with Pronger cheering him on from the pit gate, if I remember
I
correctly.
remember that, yeah.
Yes,
Standing
yes.
in the pit gate there.
So that's a great little story that nobody's
Wade.
ever going to
Appreciate that. It's kind of neat to, as a kid in the stands, just, I didn't know anybody. I was just a race fan, and I'm watching these guys, and they were bigger than life.
Exactly. I mean, it's like I said. I mean, I felt like Jared Payton all my life because, and then, oh, wait a minute. Let's see. Later on, Bob Pronger, my buddy now, because on Saturday mornings in 1967, I was in where's Bruce? I was in a band. We know that. We were Psychotic Realm, we were called. All right. Playing at all the high schools. And I had to get
attracting all the girls, right?
Yes, yes. I had to get my hair cut if I wanted to work on the car.
Yeah.
You know who the haircut giver was?
No.
Bob Pronger.
Was he a licensed barber?
No, but he had that little shaver, and zoop, I got a buzz cut. I looked like Bob that whole summer. It was crazy.
Did you have to wear a wig for the
No,
gigs
I
then?
didn't.
No,
Well,
okay.
I wasn't then. Yeah, no.
Wayne
Still-
Coleman, it's always great to talk to you.
Well, thanks, Stan. We appreciate
Thank
it.
you. One more up here. Kyle Harvey. Welcome, Kyle Harvey from North Carolina. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thanks, Stan. I appreciate it. How do I follow that? I don't have.
Well, you've got a number of stories.
Somebody once told me there's no such thing as a lie in a good story.
That's true.
So I'll
Who's
do my
the liar
best.
telling
I'll do
you
my
this?
best.
Kyle, you grew up around Raceway Park and from Garden Homes, Illinois, and Paul Bauer, and
That's correct.
I remember a young kid coming up to me, "Hey, buddy, take my picture next to Harry Simonson." And I go, "Okay," but that's about 1969. And you raced and you helped guys with the cars. You were on crew, but then you started driving your own car. I think you got a hold of a old Johnny Busnick car and tried
That's correct, yeah.
Sportsman, etc. But I think the cool thing about Kyle Harvey, at least in my thought process, is you left the Chicagoland area and became a NASCAR spotter.
That's
and
correct.
I can't believe what those guys, the pressure they are under, and I would think every year it gets worse and worse, but you've spotted for the top-notch guys in NASCAR, the Xfinity Series, ARCA, etc., and you're kind of a guy that they call up when they need a spotter. Maybe you're semi-retired now, but tell us a little bit about that. I think it's just incredible what you do.
Well, once I got down there and I started to work on a couple of race teams, a couple of them finally found out that I raced, and so they would send me up for practice to spot. and then they figured out I was pretty good at it. And I got to be honest, I've spotted for well over 100 different drivers. So, I mean, it doesn't mean I can't keep a job. It's just the way the sport works. And, I've spotted for Dale Earnhardt. I've spotted for Junior. Dale Jarrett. I was a long-time spotter for Dick Trickle. And it was really quite rewarding. There were some guys that were a pain in the ass playing English to spot for. You were damned if you did and damned if you didn't. And, it just was here's a kid that had a dream and was hanging out at Paul Bauer's at the end of the driveway, and I followed my dream and was able to fulfill it. And it wasn't a miracle dream because I worked hard for it, but it became reality. And I appreciate what you said, and it just when I look back and got to be and do what I've done is just phenomenal for a guy that started out, selling concessions at Raceway Park, even, things like that, So if it wasn't for Raceway Park and Paul Bauer, I would have never made it in that industry.
Incredible. You mentioned Dick Trickle. You and him had a kind of a neat relationship over the years, and he was a good friend of yours. And tell us a Dick Trickle story or two.
I got one that I really enjoy telling. Yeah,
If you can, yeah, okay.
I have
family
one.
show, I'm sorry.
He and I went to an event in Winston-Salem that was held every year. It was called Race-A-Rama or something like that, and it was a basketball arena, a minor league basketball team, and they had the sections that you sit in, and in front of the sections that you sit in, they had tables set up, and on the front of the tables were the drivers' names. So if you wanted those particular drivers, you sat in those sections. Well, we walk in the stadium, and I said to Dick, hey, you're over there. And he looks over, and we're walking across the gym floor, and he elbows me, and he goes, what's with that? And I didn't know what he was talking about. He goes, on the table it said Jeffrey Bodine and Dick Trickle instead of Jeff Bodine. And I said, I don't know. I don't have a clue. And so we get over there, and he's setting up his cards and his Sharpies and stuff like that. And Jeff Bodine shows up, and Jeff says hi. They make their, acknowledge each other and that. And Dick says to Jeff, he says, what's with the Jeffrey Bodine? He says, why aren't you using Jeff? He says, well, Jeffrey's my legal name, and I decided to start using that because there's so many Jeffs in racing. I just figured I'd use my legal name and as Jeffrey. And Dick looks right at him without beating a beat or anything, and says, "Well, my legal name is Dick. Is Richard." He says, "And there's definitely too many Dicks in racing, so that's what I'm going to do."
I mean, a pretty amazing guy, Dick Trickle. I mean, the short track history and legends there, and then he, he's in his 40s, late 40s too, I believe. He goes down there to NASCAR land, gets in that Stavola Brothers '84 car, and becomes Rookie of the Year.
That was a little before me, but that was still when they had it at the Waldorf Astoria. And one of the things, if you ever saw his speech there, he gets up and gives his speech for being Rookie of the Year, and he ends it by saying, "Thanks for giving a kid a chance."
Kid, yeah, definitely. I remember him coming to Raceway Park. Two things about Dick Trickle: short track, Chicago area. 1971, he shows up on a Sunday afternoon at Illiana Speedway to race just in a 30-lap feature race. He had to be coming from somewhere, going home, and he stopped at Illiana to run. And then about, 3-4 years later, Try Our Promotions, the Rulo brothers, they put on a race at Grundy County Speedway. And these guys, the Rulo brothers, the story I heard, they antagonize Trickle and say, you won here today at Grundy County Speedway, but you're really, you need to go to Blue Island, to Raceway Park. There's this guy, Bud Kaler, and you need to, show up there and race against him and see how you do. And I was in the infield, and there's Trickle with a big car hauler coming in the pit gate, and I go, oh, cow, look at this. And one of my favorite pictures I ever took, and I'm taking up your time, I apologize, is Dick Trickle, Bud Kaler in the pits in the front bumper. Neat stuff.
That picture means a lot to me too. I mean, because I really didn't know Dick then, other than racing around him or being around him. And one time, I took my dad for Father's Day. My dad hated racing. Took him to Grundy because Dick Trickle was racing there on Father's Day. And remember walking around that purple Mustang, just thinking, "My gosh, this thing is unbelievable."
Well, I think back in the day, we had racing newspapers, weekly or summertime every week. The paper would be produced, Illustrated Speedway News, National Speed Sport News, Midwest. And guys like Dick Trickle became legends, at least in my mind, because you'd read about these guys and their accomplishments in Wisconsin or wherever. And, Dick Trickle's going to be at Grundy next Sunday afternoon, and people would say, I want to see this guy race. He cleans house up there in Wisconsin, and he's going to come to Chicago and race against Bud Hu and the rest of the Chicago contingent. Pretty neat, I thought.
That was the persona, whatever the big word I'm trying to say, persona of him, that this legend was coming to our local track.
And then he'd hang around and sign autographs, and he'd have his cocktail next to him. And, hey, kid, go get me another beer out of the cooler, will you? And he was just a neat guy.
Bill Furuyama used to own cars for Ted Janicek and the likes back then.
And Bob Pronger.
And Bob Pronger, that's correct, the Zero car too back then. And after he was at Raceway Park, they were in the East Bar a little bit too long and decided that it was too late to go home, and Bill Furuyama let them park their car at his place and work on it the next day before they went back to Wisconsin.
Neat stories.
I have
this will never be duplicated in the next 100 years of short track racing,
Ever.
I don't think.
Never.
I have one more if you'll indulge me, because I'm getting prompted to tell it, but this is a real meaning story to me about Dick Trickle and our relationship. Dick was a humorous guy, like I said before, and he told jokes and told stories and stuff like that, and I must have heard most of them 100 times if I heard them once. And he had one joke that he would tell, and I got to learn it by heart, and I have to tell the joke to get to where I'm going with this. So there was a farmer down on his luck, and he was out plowing his field one day and had a problem, and he was really, really down on his luck, and he wasn't working, and he went and looked in the paper, and there was a local honky-tonk that was looking for a bouncer. So this guy decided he would go and apply for the job as a bouncer. So he gets there and he walks in, and before he even says anything, the interviewer says, "I want to thank you for coming in." He says, "But I need a big guy. You're kind of small. I want somebody that can really scare people and have a presence." And the guy says, I thank you for coming in. He says, "But I need a big guy." He says, "Well, listen, let me tell you how tough I am." He says, "I'm plowing my field one day, and I hit a stump or I hit a rock, and it threw me off the tractor. The disc ran me over and cut my arm off, and I ran back and shut the tractor off, and then I ran back and looked in the dirt, and I found my arm, and then I ran a quarter mile to my farm, and I sewed my arm back on." And the interviewer says, "Oh my God, anybody that could do that is tough enough for my job." And the guy goes, "Thank you, all right." Well, the meaning of that joke and that story is because from then on, or not that exact time, but after that, many of them jokes, whether Dick was in a convertible or a pickup truck or in the race car, he would always look up and find me or look for me up on the roof. And when he was on the pace lap, he'd go like this. So memorable.
Neat stories, neat stories. Kyle Harvey, thank you very much. For Pat Eklund, always a pleasure. Roger Smith, Kyle, Wayne Coleman, great. Thank you very
Stan,
much, guys.
Thank you so much for giving your time for all this. To everybody, have a great hand for Stan here. He's
Thank you very much.
He's like the heart of Chicagoland auto racing. So if you want to know, he's one of the few that knows. Thanks, Stan.